Hello, welcome back. In this video, we're going to talk about network address translation, or NAT, on a Palo Alto Networks next generation firewall. There are two types of NAT. There's source NAT, where I am a source device and I am trying to go to a destination, and I need to translate my address to something different. So most of the time, the most common use for source NAT is I am internal network computers and I'm trying to go out to the internet, but my RFC 1918 addresses don't work on the internet. So I need to translate my source address to something else before I can connect to the internet. The second type of NAT is destination NAT, and that is where I am a client somewhere else and I am destined to a device, but the device that I'm destined to is at one address and the device address that I'm trying to connect to is something else, and I have to translate the address that I'm going to the address that I am actually supposed to go to. So think of it as destination NAT as I'm going to www.google.com, fully qualified domain name that translates into some publicly accessible IP address that server possibly sets inside of a DMZ that maybe has an RFC 1918 address. So I'm going to go to the public address. It's going to hit the firewall. It's going to then translate me to the address of my destination. So easiest way to keep those separated in your head. So when we talk about source NATs, we can either do a static one-to-one mapping, same with destination NAT. So if I am address A, I'm going to get translated to address B, and it's a one-to-one mapping. You can do a dynamic IP mapping. So that would be where I have one address that I'm going to, and that gets translated into a pool of addresses. So maybe I have my internal subnet and I translate myself to a pool slash 24 or 4 or 5 IP addresses that I'm using. The last one would be dynamic IP import, or DIP. You might also see this called PAT, port address translation. And this is essentially where I map a whole bunch of IP addresses, so like my whole internal subnet, to a single IP address on the public side. And then every one of those translations gets the IP address colon and a port number to the appended to that. So as you go out to the internet, when the traffic returns, it knows who to send the traffic back to. So for this lab here, we're going to actually go to the firewall and we're going to jump into the policies tab. And then right here below security, we're going to go to NAT. If you remember in this example, we have two internet circuits. So we have two connections to the internet. So we're going to have to create two NAT policies. That's because both of these um, ISPs that I have, the internet connection circuits, have different IP addressing schemes. So if I go out of one circuit, I have to have a NAT translation for that IP addressing scheme. And if I go out the other circuit, I have to have a translation for that IP addressing scheme. So the first thing we need to do is click on Add down here at the bottom. And then we're going to give this a name. We're just going to call it ISP1 NAT. And then give it a description if you want to. If you want to do tags or group tags, we'll talk about those when we get into an objects discussion. We want to make sure our NAT type is IPv4. We can also have NAT 6 to 4. So if I'm doing a NAT IPv6 to an IPv4 translation, or if you're doing a NAT to IPv6. So we're going to be IPv4 for this. On the original packet tab, so here's where under source zone, this is where I'm actually going to choose where my client is sourcing from. So in my case, it is my inside network, and I'm destined to the outside zone. So we're going to build a NAT for IP address translation going out to the internet. So my destination interface in this case is going to be 1.1. For any service. So if you wanted to lock this down to any specific service, HTTP, HTTPS, DNS, whatever, you could do that. This really comes much more handy when you're doing destination NAT. If you wanted to lock this down to any addresses, you could. Fundamentally, we just need these parts right here for a basic NAT statement. And then on the translating packet, I have to decide how I'm going to take that source address, the destination for that outside zone and interface. How am I going to translate that? So we have static, we have dynamic IP, we have a persistent dynamic IP import, we have dynamic IP import. So I'm going to do dip because I only have one address on my interface. I'm going to use the interface address. Here I'm going to choose my Ethernet 1.1, and then I'm going to select its IP address. So now every source that comes to head towards the internet is going to get translated to Ethernet 1.1's IP address of 10.249.1.2 colon and a port number. And then we click OK. And now we have a NAT translation for our first ISP. So quickly, I'm going to go ahead and create a NAT translation for my second ISP. And it's going to be the exact same process. So we got to have a name. We got an original packet. It's going to be inside source, an outside destination, Ethernet 1.2 this time. Translated packet, we're going to do dip. Then we're going to say an interface address, interface 1.2, and this IP address, and say OK. So now at this point, we're ready to commit. And then when the commit is completed, we'll be right back. And now the commit is completed, so we can go ahead and close this out. For this next example, we're going to look at a diagram here of on the untrusted internet, if I'm a client and I'm going to 192.0.2.250, and this is the public facing address of our web server that's in the DMZ. We're then going to come over here and we're going to translate it to an address. And in this diagram, we're using 10.1.1.100. So it's going to be a little bit different because my IP addressing scheme is slightly different, but we can make that adjustment on the fly. So we go back to our NAT policies. We're going to click add. Then at this point, we're going to need to, so I can do web server. And then same thing, we're going to leave it as IPv4. And then my original packet is on the outside IP address. And this is where this NAT translation gets a little bit tricky to kind of wrap your mind around, but I'm going to talk through this. So our source is on the outside. Your brain makes you think that the destination would be in the DMZ. But remember, we have to translate before we can actually send the packet to the DMZ because the, the address in the DMZ is different than our outside address. So the destination zone is outside here. We're going to leave this as any interface and any service. This is where you could actually lock it down to HTTP or HTTPS or some specific port if they were coming in on a port number. So here, the destination address, we're going to add this. And in this case, we're going to put in the 192.0.2.20. And then on the translated packet, not under the source address translation where we did our source translation, but over here on the destination address translation. We're actually going to do this to a static IP since this is a one-to-one mapping. And then our translated address, in our case, is going to be 172.23.20.10. Put a mask on there. And then if we had a translated port, we could put that here. So if I was coming in on an IP address and I needed to, on the web server, maybe it was port 8083, but to the facing world, it was port 443, then we could do that. If we needed to do DNS rewrite, we could do that here as well. But now I can go ahead and just click OK, and you'll see we have a web server NAT. So if I'm coming from the outside, I have to translate it at the outside address from this address here to this address here, and then I can actually send it, route it over to the DMZ. Need to make one little change real quick. I forgot to add my subnet mask on there. So 192.0.2.20/24. So now we have a NAT translation for an inbound packet. So as we go along, you'll be able to view inside the monitor tab the packets in the logs where NAT's happening. You can see if your hit count here is actually incrementing to know that that rule is actually being used. So I want to go ahead and commit this real quick, and then I will pause and return. Okay, our commit was completed successfully. So now that we've gone through NAT, real quick, if you go to the monitor tab, and I don't have a lot of my traffic set up yet, so we're not actually going to see traffic in here yet. We will as the videos go along, but I'm going to show you real quick how you can actually view your NAT translation. So if you go to one of these columns here where there's a name, you notice a little arrow pops up. If you click that down arrow and go to columns, you can actually select the columns that you want. So I always remove a few just because they kind of get in my way and I don't use them personally. So get those out of your way. But if you scroll down and hit the little arrow at the bottom down here and click on it, you can actually see, looking for source NAT, NAT source IP. So if I check this box here, say okay, you would now see the source IP address. So this is for your source NAT. So you'd see the source IP address. So in my case, 172.23.8. something. And then you would see the address that it got translated to. So if you saw the 10.249.1.2, you would know that went through ISP1. If you saw 10.249.2.2, you would know that that went through ISP2. So this is a way you can actually verify that your NAT's actually happening. So thank you very much. I'm going to also put in the description of the video, I'm going to put a link to my basic firewall configuration guide. So as we go along through this video, you can see this NAT information here. So we actually go through in this diagram, we talk about the different versions of NAT that I did not cover in this example. So this is source NAT, showing the different packet types. So your static IP, what that would look like. Here is the dynamic IP and building out a pool. Here is, DIP that we did actually using a translated address. Here's DIP using the interface IP address. Some different NAT examples. And then the destination NAT that we just went over, but also the explanation of all of the different types of translations that you can do. There's also a whole lot of other information that is great for a basic firewall configuration, and it's pretty much the guide that we're going to use for the duration of these videos. So I hope this has been helpful, and look forward to the next video. Thank you very much. Have a great day.